All right, it looks like we have everyone, so let's begin. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Leslie McWhorter, and I'm the Strater Product Manager. I'm here today to go over some of the frequently asked questions of Strater 4 that pertain to cross-sections. The questions I'll be answering are, how do I create a cross-section? How can I show my cross-section logs at the proper elevations? How can I change the colors of my cross-section layers and make the logs match? How can I customize my cross-section view by adding legends, scale bars, well headers, etc.? And then how can I display the ground surface on my cross-section? If you would like to follow along, the files I will be using have been uploaded to our share file site, so you can download them and follow along as I go. After the discussion of each feature, I will stop for a few minutes to answer any questions you might have. You can send your questions to me via the chat function. At the very top of your screen, you should see a green tab that says Viewing Leslie McWhorter's Application. Click on that tab and click the chat button. Please send chats just to Golden Software and not to everyone. This webinar will be recorded, so after the webinar is finished, the video will be available in the Training Videos tab of the Strater 4 homepage on our website, www.goldensoftware.com. So let's begin. I will first go over how to create a cross-section. In order to display a cross-section, you need to have a colors table to specify where the wells are located geospatially, and you also need to have either a depth or an interval table which specifies the lithology or geophysical log information that will be used to create the cross-section. In this example, I will be using lithology information in a lithology table, which is a specific type of interval table. From the Project Settings tab, go to File, Open Multiple. Choose the Strater 4 FAQ webinar.xls file and click Open. Verify that both the colors and lithology tables, or sheets rather, are selected and click Open. The first dialog that pops up is Specify Worksheet Column Definitions. We're going to make sure that Specify Column Header Row is checked because my sheets have header information, and I'm going to click Next. The next dialog is Specify Data Type and Column Positions. After the dialog is listed the file name and then an exclamation point and the sheet name. This is the colors sheet, as we can see. So we're going to make sure that our data type is set to colors and that each of our columns are set to the appropriate column from the data table, and then click Finish. We'll get the Specify Worksheet Columns definition dialog again for the lithology sheet. The Specify Column Header Row box is already checked, so I'm going to click Next. Now I'm going to verify that the data type is set to lithology and the columns are set to the appropriate columns, which they are. So I'm going to click Finish. And now both my lithology and my colors table have been loaded in. So now that our data is loaded, there are two paths you can follow to create the cross-section. Both of these are easiest to do from the borehole tab. In the first method that you can create your cross-section, you already know which logs are going to appear in what order in your cross-section. So you can go straight to cross-section, create cross-section. In the Create Well Selector dialog, verify that all of the logs you want to be in your cross-section are in this Wells in Selector box on the right, and that they're in the order that you want them to appear from left to right. So borehole 1 will be on the right, on the left, and borehole 5 will be on the right. I can click and drag these to reorder them if they're not in the order that I want. And once I've verified that they're all there, I can go ahead and click OK. The next dialog is Import or Select Data to create cross-section logs. Since my data is in a lithology table, I will be creating a lithology zone bar log cross-section. and I want my table set to lithology, which it is. So I can click OK, and my cross-section is created. Let's say that we didn't know what order our logs were going to be in our cross-section. I'm going to delete each of these map and cross-section tabs that we just created and go back to the borehole tab. And in this instance, we're going to go to Map, Create Well Map. Now that our well map is created, I'm going to click on Wells 1, go to the Labels tab in the Property Manager, and set Label 1 to Hole ID so I can see which wells are where. Some of the well labels are cut off, so I'm going to go to Map 1 in the Object Manager, click on the Limits tab in the Property Manager, and click the Fit All button to expand my limits just enough so that I can see all of the labels. Now that I know which wells are where, I'm going to go ahead and add a well selector line by right-clicking on the map, going to Add Well Selector. My cursor has turned into a black arrow, and every time I hover over a well, the well name should pop up, which means that I am in well selector selection mode. So I'm going to click on my wells from left to right. And then once I've clicked on the last well, I'm going to double click to end the selection line and hit Escape on my keyboard to end selection mode. So you can see my cursor has turned back into a white arrow. The well selection line shows up here under the wells object in the Object Manager, and it's named based on the wells that are in the line in order from left to right. So I'm going to right-click on my well selection line, go to Create Cross-Section, and then it automatically takes me to that second dialog that import or select data to create cross-section logs. Again, here we still want lithology zone bar log and a lithology table, so I'm going to click OK, and my cross-section has been created. If, for instance, we had LAS data or some sort of geophysical data, when we are creating our cross-section, we would want to change the type of cross-section logs to be created to line symbol log, and then we would choose the table and data column as appropriate. So are there any questions about how to create a cross-section? Okay, so I see one question coming in. My layers look horrible. How can I fix them? Okay, this can happen sometimes because of the way that Strater chooses the layers. For example, the one that we have on the screen right now doesn't look very realistic as far as where the layers are connecting. If you want to reshape a specific layer, you can click on that layer in the Object Manager and then go to Draw, Reshape. And now if you notice, the nodes for that specific layer are highlighted in blue, and I can click and drag those. I can add extra layers by holding Control and clicking, and I can also delete layers by clicking on the node and clicking Delete. And you can click onto another layer to repeat the process for that other layer, and then hit Escape when you're done. If you want to reshape an entire layer, and it's going to be more tedious than what we just saw, the best way to do it would be to delete either that specific layer or all of the layers, and then use the cross-section Connect Logs with Layers command in order to completely redraw the layers manually. And in that way, it makes it easier to specify what your layers are going to look like if you have information about that. And I'm going to talk about that option in a later section of this webinar, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into this. So I see another question. Someone says, what about coordinate system information? That's a very good point. So if we go back to our map layer here, you'll notice that these units are just the units that I have in my easting and northern columns of my collars table. But if we click on the Wells object and go to the Coordinate System tab, the name is Unreferenced Local System, which means that we don't have a coordinate system set. You can set the coordinate system here by clicking the Set button and then navigating to whatever your coordinate system is. So maybe I'm in Predefined Projected Systems, UTM, WGS84, Zone, I don't know, 11 North. And then I could click OK, and that would update. And if I had multiple layers, like say I had a base layer as well, then I could set the coordinate system of each of those layers separately, and then I could change the coordinate system of the entire map such that both of those layers are in a cohesive system. So I could set the coordinate system to UTM, and then I could change it to lat long for the entire map if that's what I wanted. Okay, so another question I see. I have a lot of small layers next to each other. We're back to the cross-section here. That I would rather be combined into a larger layer. How can I do that? So if you click on Logs in the Object Manager, there's this Merge Intervals checkbox in the Property Manager. If you check that, I'm not going to do it, but if you check that dialog, then it will merge each of those layers next to each other into a single layer. Okay, and then one last question. I'm using LAS data to generate my logs. When my cross-section is created, all I see is logs where are the layers. So when you're creating a cross-section from a geophysical log data, you need to choose your layer tops before Strater can create the layers, or bottoms. It doesn't matter either way. But Strater doesn't know what criteria you're using to choose those layer boundaries. And so you need to do that before it can tell you what the layers are. You can do this either manually or you can load in layer tops from a depth table. And both of these options are under the cross-section menu under layer marks. There's import, which allows you again to import those tops, or there's create edit, so you can manually choose those. Are there any more questions about this section? Okay, well, moving on. The next question I'm going to answer is how to display the cross-section logs at their proper elevation values. To do so, I'm going to add a depth log to our cross-section so we can see what's going on. So I'm going to click on the depth log button in the toolbar and then click in my cross-section pane. Right now my cross-section is overlapping this log, so I'm going to click on my cross-section and use these green handles to make my cross-section skinnier so I can see those labels. Okay, because I'm going to be showing elevation rather than depth, I'm going to click on the depth table, and in the depth log tab of the property manager, I'm going to change the orientation to elevation. Now you can see that these actually look like the elevation values, but they're all still at the same height. And so in order to modify this so each of those are showing at the different elevation values in the colors table, we're going to go to View, View Properties, and then in the Property Manager, I'm going to change the reference datum to mean sea level. And I do want to recreate my cross-section. Now you can see that each of these wells is at the specific height or a specific elevation that was specified in that colors table, which is from 610 to 693 meters. So are there any questions about displaying the cross-section logs at their proper elevations? Okay, I see one question coming in. I noticed there's another option called marker bed. What is that for? Okay, so that's referring to the reference datum here. There is another option called marker bed. And that is if you have a specific layer that you want to base the rest of your logs on. Like say I had a coal seam that was running through each of my logs. I could set this reference datum to marker bed, and I would set the marker bed to that coal layer. And what happens is that the logs shift such that the top of that coal seam in each of these wells are going to be at a single depth of 0. And so each of the logs is going to adjust their depth accordingly. And so if you do have a depth log in elevation values, this isn't going to make sense in that context, so you would want to change it back to depth. So are there any more questions? Let me go ahead and change this back to mean sea level. No? Okay, so moving on. The next question I'm going to answer is how to change the colors of the cross-section layers and get the logs to match those colors. So if we click on the logs layer here in the Object Manager, we can see that the logs are using a lithology scheme called lithology keyword in order to color those. And if we click on layers, the layers are using a keyword scheme called cross-section scheme. Now, if we had, I mentioned earlier that you can have lithology information in a lithology table or an interval table, which is a broader term. We have ours in a lithology table, which is why the logs are using a lithology scheme. But if we had our lithology information in an interval table, these, instead of lithology logs, these would be zone bar logs, and so they would be using a keyword scheme, just like the layers do. So in that instance, I would only need to change one scheme. In this instance, I need to change 2, but I'll show you it's going to be a very easy process. So let's go ahead and go up to Draw, Scheme Editor. And now I'm going to expand my lithology keyword scheme. I can click on each of these scheme items in order to change the contact line properties, the fill properties, and pattern line properties, etc. And then if I want to, I can save the scheme by clicking this Save button at the bottom. I've already done this because I wanted to save a little bit of time here, so I'm going to open the scheme that I created earlier with this open icon. Now this SCH file is the lithology scheme that I created, so I'm going to select it and click Open. And now this is my lithology scheme here. It's got a similar name to the old one, so I'm going to click on that old scheme and I'm going to delete it with this X button. And now I just have that single lithology scheme. In order to get a keyword scheme that has the same properties that this lithology scheme has, I'm going to first click this button that has 2 pages. It's for Copy Scheme. And so now there are 2 copies of that lithology scheme. And next I'm going to click on this button that looks like a double-headed arrow. And this will convert that lithology scheme to a keyword scheme. So now each of those lithology keyword or lithology keyword schemes are the same. So I'm going to click OK. And now for the logs object, I can set the lithology scheme to that lithology keyword. And I can set the layers scheme to lithology keyword copy. And now you can see that both the log and the layers have the exact same scheme. And they've both been updated. So are there any questions about changing the colors of your cross-section logs or layers? So I see a question coming in. I modified my scheme, but I still can't see the layer. Okay, so there are a couple of reasons that this could be happening. Let's open the scheme editor again. One of the reasons might be the item name. So the keyword item name here is lowercase letters. If, for example, in my lithology table I was using capital letters, these wouldn't match, and so everywhere that they didn't match, that layer wouldn't be showing up. Another thing that might be happening is that under fill properties, there's this foreground opacity. If that's set to 0, that means that the layer is completely transparent, so that could also be an issue. And then the other thing that might be happening is after you changed your scheme, it might be that you didn't actually update what scheme is being pulled from. Okay, so let's see, another question just came in. Can I add a custom fill pattern? Absolutely. So again, if I go back to that scheme editor and expand the lithology keyword scheme, if I click on one of those scheme items, under fill properties, if you expand the pattern, at the bottom of this drop-down menu, there's a load file button. So you can click that button, and then you can select any image type file, PNG, GIF, JPEG, etc., and click Open. And once you do so, you can also set the cover mode to either tile or stretch, and in that way you can load your custom fill pattern. Are there any other questions about changing the colors of your cross-section logs and layers? No? Okay, so moving on. The next feature I'm going to address is how to customize your cross-section log by adding a legend, a scale bar, and a well header. So first, let's go ahead and add a legend. So I'm going to go to Draw, Legend, and I'm going to click in my cross-section pane where I want my legend to occur. Now I'm going to hit Escape, and my mouse turns back to the normal cursor. And if I click on my legend in the Property Manager, I can edit the legend properties. So first of all, I'm going to change the scheme to lithology keyword. Because this is a lithology scheme, the only sample option is rectangle. If I chose the copy of that, which is a keyword scheme, then there are multiple options. There's rectangle, symbol, or both. The symbol doesn't mean anything to us in this case, so if you chose the copy, choose rectangle as your sample options. I'm going to set the number of columns to 2, and then I'm also going to modify the title. I'm going to call this Lithology. And so now my legend is as I would like it to be. So let's go ahead and add a horizontal scale bar at the bottom of our cross-section. So you can go up to Draw, Scale Bar, and I'm going to click at the bottom of the cross-section pane and hit Escape. Now if I click on the scale bar, I can change the properties. So I'm going to set the type to cross-section, and I'm going to go to the Label tab, and under Layout, I'm going to change the angle to 0 so that the labels are rotated. And I'm going to scoot that up a little. And so now my horizontal scale bar has been created. And last, let's go ahead and add some well headers so we know which wells are which. So I'm going to go up to cross-section, add well headers, and those automatically appear. You don't need to actually click. But I can click and drag to move those around and to edit the properties. You can add up to 5 different headers that appear with each of those. The ones that appear above the show symbol mark in this dialog will also appear above it in the actual well header, and the ones below it will appear below the well header. And there are a series of things that you can choose from: inclination, azimuth, scale, etc. I'm going to leave those alone. I will, however, change the symbol. Right now, they're using a keyword scheme, but I want all of the symbols to be the same, so it's easier if I don't use a scheme. So I'll uncheck that box, and then I can manually edit the symbol that's being used. So I'll check GSI map symbols, and I'll change the symbol to number 7 and increase the size. So now you can see your well headers. So are there any questions about customizing your cross-section view? Okay, so I see a question coming in. Can I display the distance between my logs in the well header? Absolutely. So if you click on your well header, in the Property Manager, there's a Distance tab, and so you just need to check the Show Distance box. Now the distance units are set to automatic, and since we don't currently have a cross-section, a coordinate system set in our map view, there is no unit being shown. So you can either manually set these to whichever units you actually have, or you can keep it set to automatic, go to your map view, and set that coordinate system like we showed earlier. Let's see. So another question I see coming in is, can I display units in the scale bar? Yes, you can also display units in the scale bar. If you click on your scale bar and you click on the Labels tab, you can set your units. Again, they're set to automatic. You can set them to whatever units you have. And then in the Title tab, you can check the box that says Display Units, and it will be displayed by default above your scale bar, but you can change the offset if you want to change where that's happening. Another question I see is, how can I display a map view in my cross-section? Okay, you can display a map view by going to Draw, Insert Map View. This will insert a map view in whichever pane you've selected last. So because we've selected the cross-section pane, that's where it would occur. So I'm going to click in the header pane, and now if I go to Draw, Insert Map View, the map view appears there. You can click and drag and you can resize it, but the top of this page can't go above the top of the header pane. So if you want to move your map, you can go to the Map tab and actually drag it on the page here, and that will modify it in the page for your cross-section. Someone is asking, where can I find vertical or horizontal exaggeration? And that's going to be in the Property Manager. Let me see here. I believe it's under View Properties. Yep. So right now we have it set to Auto Recreate Scale, and the depth settings are automatic. But if we uncheck that box, we can modify the vertical exaggeration there. And for horizontal, you can actually just use these handles to click and drag to modify that. And someone else is asking if you can adjust the scale to a specific value rather than automatic fit. Again, if you're referring to vertically, that would be under View Properties. You can change those depth settings, and if you're referring to the horizontal scale bar here, you can modify those under the Layered tab. You can uncheck the Auto Show Label Range and change your range. And then in the ticks section, you can change the scaling to user-defined and actually change your intervals there as well. Okay, so we need to be moving on. If I haven't gotten to your question, I'll go ahead and send you an email about that later. So the final question that I'll be answering today was a highly requested feature, and that's the ability to display ground surface on a cross-section. As you can see from our cross-section here, the tops of these layers are connected with a straight line, which is not realistic in most cases. So we can actually show ground surface now using this cross-section create or connect logs with layers command. In order to do this, we need to have an image, like a JPEG or a GIF or something, of the top of our cross-section. And if you don't have one, you can create one in Surfer. So let's go ahead and start. First, I'm going to modify my borehole depth because I know that my topography goes all the way up to 700 meters. So first let me, oops, I'm going to go ahead and set my auto recalculate scale. I'm going to change my depth settings to user defined, and because of the fact that I know that the top elevation is 693, which corresponds to a depth of 0, a depth of -7 then would correspond to a depth or an elevation of 700. So I'm going to recreate my cross section. You can see it does indeed start at 700 now. Now I'm going to delete my layers. You don't need to do this. You could either turn off your layers or you can delete just specific layers like the top layer. But I don't like the way any of these look. I'm going to recreate all of them, not necessarily in this webinar, but so I'm just going to delete the entire layers object by hitting delete on my keyboard. So now I'm going to copy and paste in my ground surface image. So I'm going to copy and paste, and then I click where I want that to appear, and there is my actual, it was, I believe, a TIFF file. But what I'm going to do next then is resize this. You can see I have a vertical scale, and so I'm going to size it such that 600 and 700 line up with what I've got in my depth log. And then and then I also want it to line up horizontally with what I've got. Once I've done so, that's pretty good right now. So I'm going to right-click on the image, go to Order Objects, and select Move to Back. Now you can see each of the wells, and you can see the top of the layer, or rather the ground surface itself. So the next step then is to select our cross-section object in the Object Manager and go to Cross-Section, Connect Logs with Layers. My top layer in each of these wells is clay, so I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to start clicking at the leftmost well and hold Shift in order to click along this surface in between the wells. When I get to each of the wells themselves, I can go ahead and stop holding Shift and click in the well. But again, in between each of the wells, I'm going to need to hold Shift. So I'm going to quickly click along the top surface here. You can definitely take a little more time doing this. But once you get over to the rightmost well, then you're going to start clicking back along the bottoms of that same layer. And you can zoom in and out as you need to. And you can also, if you make a mistake while you're clicking, you can right-click to undo the last node. And you can use the sliders on the bottom to scroll across your log. Okay, so now we're at this side. So we're going to click the bottom of the layer, and we're going to, again, hold Shift in between the layers and click back along the bottoms to complete this polygon. Now once we've reached our first well again, we're going to double click to finalize our polygon, and then I'm going to hit Escape to exit digitizing mode. Now that we've digitized the top of the surface, I can actually delete the image. I don't need that anymore. And there's the top of my surface. So now I can keep going along with that process. So I can go back to click my cross section, go back to cross section, connect logs with layers, and then I can choose the next layer down, so sandstone, and I can begin clicking in that next layer, and you can begin clicking anywhere. The key here is that because we have specific nodes that we've clicked earlier, in addition to holding Shift to click in between these layers, we're going to want to click or to hold the Alt key, and that will snap our nodes to the nearest node such that we won't have any gaps between our layers. And so you can keep going in this way and fully customize your layers and your top surface. So are there any questions about creating ground surface on your cross sections? Okay, so someone mentions here, I tried to do this and then sometime later I got a message asking to redraw my cross section. Now all my changes are gone. What happened and how can I get those custom layers back? So because this is a full customization, these layers are no longer connected at all to the logs themselves. So if you do anything after you create these custom layers and you recreate your cross-section, it will recreate those default layers and you'll lose your customization. In order to avoid this, I recommend making sure this is the last thing you change. So if you notice the earlier things we did to our cross-section, adding well headers and legends and things like that, you'll want to do all of those before you change your custom layers so that it doesn't recreate and you lose those changes. In order to get your changes back, if you do happen to do that, you just have to keep undoing until you get to the unmodified cross-section that you had. And if you do happen to be prompted after you create your custom layers to recreate your cross-section, make sure to click No, otherwise you will lose those changes. Oh, and as always, save often so you don't lose your work. So someone is asking, you mentioned that if I have ground surface as data points rather than an image, I can use Surfer to get an image. How do I do that? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open up Surfer really quickly, and I can go ahead and show you how to do that. Okay, so in Surfer, I'm going to go ahead and open up my ground surface data. So this is XY points. And if you scroll down, you'll notice there are 205 points. So at the very top, I'm going to highlight row 1, right-click, and choose Insert. Now in this first row, in the first column, I'm going to type 205. This is our header row because we're going to save this as a blanking file. And this first value is going to be the number of rows I have in this header row, which is 205. I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to choose the Save As type, BLN, Golden Software Blanking, and I'm going to click Save. Now if I go to my plot window, I can go to Map, New Base Map. I can choose my BLN file and click Open. And you'll notice, even though the scale's a little off right now, this is a top surface. So I can click on Map. I can go to the Scale tab and unclick Proportional XY Scaling, and I can modify the scale so it actually looks how I want it to. Once it looks how I want it to, all I have to do is go to File, Export, and then I can export this image as like a JPEG or some sort of image format to be used in Strater. And so it's as easy as that. Okay, someone else is asking, how do you show well construction on your cross-section? So let's go ahead and go back to, oops, sorry about that. Let's go ahead and go back to Strater. In order to add any kind of log, well construction log included, onto your cross-section, all you have to do is go up to Log and choose the type of log, or click on the associated button in the toolbar. So if you want to add a well construction log, we don't actually have a well construction table here, but all I'd have to do is go to Log, Well Construction, and then click in my table here, or in my cross-section pane where I want it to occur. So a depth log is actually an example of that we've already done. And for another type of log, if we go to the Base tab, which each of those log types will have, we can change the whole ID filter. So I can show the well construction log for borehole 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 if I want to. Okay, so another person is asking, what happens if you have several different lithology types along your ground surface? In your example, you have only one lithology. That's a great observation. I do only have one type here, but it's the exact same process if you have two different types or three different types. So you would still use connect logs with layers. Only, let's see. So say I'm just going to really quickly click along here, and say that this layer ends here. When I click there, I can just start coming back. And in that way, I've just created a clay layer that's smaller than the one that we had. So you would want to keep that image file around for longer than just this first layer, because you need it for any other layer that touches that ground surface. But again, once you've actually essentially digitized that entire top surface, then you can go ahead and get rid of that image and keep going with the rest of your layers. Let's see here. So I see another question coming in. See, how do I? So I think the additional questions that I see here are a little more in depth, and we're kind of running out of time here. So if it's all right, I'll go ahead and address the rest of your questions via email. If anyone else has any additional questions, you're welcome to email me. My email address is Leslie, L-E-S-L-I-E, @goldensoftware.com. Or you can contact stratersupport@goldensoftware.com. Again, this webinar recording will be posted online shortly, and any questions that I did not address during this webinar will be addressed in email shortly. So thank you for your time today. I will be sticking around for a little while in case any shorter questions come in, but other than that, have a nice day. Thank you for attending.